So good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today. And thank you to all of our attendees and to our co-host, Vodafone Business, for joining today. The focus today is on the area of cybersecurity, and in particular around the retail and supply chain threat landscape. Jointly, Vodafone and SecurityScorecard are providing the capability for you to assess your own security posture, and we'll be walking you through some of that today and some of that proposition. In terms of setting the scenes, I should say before I start, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and we will come back to the questions at the end of the session. We hope over the next 30 to 40 minutes just to very quickly and simply walk you through some of the joint value proposition of Vodafone Business and SecurityScorecard as we bring to market a clear proposition to help you to manage your own cybersecurity posture. As you can imagine, with the move, today, your attack plane, if you will, the attack plane of your corporate, your enterprise, it extends well beyond your traditional perimeter, right? As online connectivity with suppliers, customers, and even with third-party business support systems becomes more and more complex, so extends that attack plane and the need to monitor beyond simply your own perimeter. Daily, we see many breaches and ransomware attacks, and lately a trend we've seen is that a development of hackers using suppliers to multiply the effect of their efforts. A great and simple example of this is Kaseya, where a company that we have tracked over the last number of years on our systems, and one that we feel should have been of concern to a lot of their partners and suppliers, and indeed to their customers. But the result of the Kaseya hacking, if you will, and the ransomware attack has impacted Kaseya, but more so it has impacted the thousands of businesses that have been taken offline, thousands of businesses similar to the ones that you guys represent here on this call. From our perspective, based on this problem statement and based upon our experience, the joint proposition from Vodafone Business and from SecurityScorecard is born from the fact that for the most part, the industry continues to rely upon point-in-time, subjective, paper-based exercises, and we as Vodafone and SecurityScorecard believe it is time for a change, and it's time to enable digital business confidence so that jointly we can all of us can thrive. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce two presenters for today. Firstly, Adam Danier-Hampton is our lead sales engineering team lead within the international division, and he's joined. Adam will be bringing us through a little bit of the SecurityScorecard solution and also giving us a live demo of the system. But firstly, I'm going to hand over to Andrei Kavalak, who within the Vodafone Business Organization has been a great leader in bringing forth the security portfolio in the cloud and security division of Vodafone Business. So Andrei, I'll ask you to take the lead here and to bring us through the next slide or two.
Thank you, Aidan. I hope and trust you can hear and see me okay. It's genuinely a pleasure to be here and to talk about something that is so dear to our hearts, and I know yours as well. All of us have gone through an amazing change over the last few years, and I think it's fair to say, and certainly we believe, that organizations have accelerated their technology adoption hugely. So even in the first 10 weeks or 10 months of a global pandemic, we have done and are re-baselining our entire society around a more digital landscape. Now, whether that is telemedicine, education, working, we've seen huge shifts in the data patterns. We look after and protect at Vodafone 625 million customers around the world, about 7.5 billion minutes of calls every day, and over 114 million IoT devices. What that gives us is an amazing insight at scale globally about what's happening in the digital world. And what we recognize is that whilst we are going on this new journey and we are re-baselining our economy, the World Economic Forum, I think, predict that by next year, 60% of the world's GDP will be digitally enabled, that we face a very real risk and a very clear threat from cybercrime. And the cyber criminals are integrated and aligned, and they are relentless and dynamic in their pursuit of economic value. They are motivated predominantly by financial gain, and they organize and orchestrate themselves in ways that we would recognize as as digitally native organizations. I think it's relevant possibly to recognize that I think for the first time we saw the global cybercrime industry overtake the global drugs trade. And these kind of headlines that we see, and these are just from the last couple of weeks, in terms of major disruptive attacks that are now not just impacting the integrity of data and people's information systems, but increasingly are bleeding through into real world safety issues, whether those are pipelines, whether there's food production, whether that's healthcare and the provision of health services to a whole nation or an organization. In that context, we genuinely believe that, and this is our mission as Vodafone with SecurityScorecard as well, that our aim is to build digital resilience for organizations of all sizes, and we do that from the inside out. And you do that in a context where I think we are all now, and go with me, living in a sort of in a cyber earthquake zone, whereby even if you are not the direct target of an earthquake or a cyber attack, you will feel the pre-shocks, the tremors, or the aftershocks and be disrupted by it. And the impact on shared services, on transport networks, on payment systems, on security, software, supply chains will be felt by your organization and your customers. And it's that resilience and that disruption that we're aiming to address. And I think there are some other key indicators for us. And it's fascinating. I think in the 17th century, that English poet, John Donne, said, "No man is an island." Well, actually, no organization is an island anymore. We are so interdependent and interconnected. That provides us with amazing opportunities, but we have a sense of shared responsibility for our security and resilience. And it's around that I think Adam later on will talk about, particularly because that shared responsibility is something we feel very, very keenly. If we think about the retail environment, I think there is probably no other industry that has been so enabled yet so disrupted by that move to online and digital baseline. And just like organizations that have moved from having folk in an office to working from home during a pandemic, I think that transition to hybrid working and hybrid purchasing has really stretched everybody. It's stretched us from a technology perspective, it's stretched us from a workflow perspective. You know, I recognize that a lot of organizations are still protecting empty offices. And I think, again, in retail, we're looking at different user journeys. We're talking about different ways to attract and retain customers. And in particular, that landscape has been recognized by the cyber criminals who are literally and deliberately targeting at scale those new systems and those new user journeys. Even the economics, and I recognize that for a lot of retail organizations, there is a huge fear that by introducing additional security controls or complexities actually disrupts or damages the purchasing process. And that, there's a stunning statistic about the shopping cart abandonment, about nearly 7 out of 10 customers. And the reasons for that are not just user error or seeing a better deal somewhere. They also relate to security. So we can play both sides of that. We can both help organizations protect and retain their customers to stop the switch, and consumers will switch if they see and perceive your organization as being insecure. But also, our research tells us that customers are likely and liable to pay a price premium for secure or enhanced services. Now, seen through that lens, it isn't just the core infrastructure that your organization has, your payment systems, your point of sale, but also recognize in the digital landscape, especially marketing, loyalty programs, demand generation, advertising, your supply chain is as much your responsibility and forms part of your attack surface and the offer that your customers have. And I think that responsibility is really, really key. We've seen, and in research in the UK, Vodafone's research tells us that there's been a 31% increase in cyber attacks since March 2020. Those cyber attacks are predominantly targeting at scale organizations. 60% of UK retailers faced a cyber attack last year, and not just the frequency, but the severity of those attacks is increasing. The other piece, which is really, really, I think, relevant to this conversation, is again that I think just over half of organizations actually have a cyber security plan in place. We would argue that to become more resilient, to offer a more secure service to your customers, to attract and retain customers, and actually respond to these growing changes, you need to start with understanding, and start with understanding and assessing not just your security posture, but those with whom you work and those with whom you share services and deliver services. And it's at that point that we think the process starts. I'll touch later on, but we genuinely see security as an ongoing set of skills and processes that you can work with Vodafone and SecurityScorecard to address. It starts with assessing and understanding your risk posture, and then protecting your environment, your users, your customers, your consumers, your data, and then detecting and responding in real time. But the entry point is that understanding. Without that, I don't think you can appropriately understand the measures or the path that you need to go on. And it's addressing that and particular structural weaknesses or advantages that retail has. Extended supply chains, collaboration across different organizations and networks, shared use of internet platforms, advertising, marketing, high staff turnover. All of these components, and Adam, I think you might touch on it as well, is give a particular risk pattern and posture to retail. Now, how do you understand that, and how do you understand your place in that is part of this conversation. So I will, with great pleasure, possibly hand over to Adam to take us through how you build that picture of your organization, and genuinely how Vodafone and SecurityScorecard together can help you then build a plan and respond to that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andre. And I will take the reins from here. So I'm going to talk a little bit, obviously, about SecurityScorecard, but I do think that there is an element of kind of introduction. What is it that we're doing? Is it kind of smoke and mirrors? What's the validity in the space that we work in? And just to highlight here, Andre did a fantastic job of just talking about the disparate nature of where we see businesses now and offices and other such environments emptying, or at least the assets as they're known in terms of people and the company itself are very dynamic. They're moving, they're changing, they're in the cloud, they're consuming services, they're doing all sorts of different things, working remotely, branch offices, all of these sorts of behaviors, which is nothing new, but only certainly something we've seen in the last couple of years is increased given the nature of what we're seeing at the moment. And what SecurityScorecard is here to do is really monitor all of the IP assets as we see it on the internet, and monitor the evolution. So similar to the scale again that Andre spoke about, and this is part of the very good relationship we have with Vodafone, is that at scale what we're trying to understand is the overall changing and the landscape that's changing for any organization anywhere in the world, any size, could be as large as Vodafone, could be as small as a corner shop or a small retail firm. It doesn't really matter. There will be an online presence for each of those organizations. And as we say, what Security Scorecard doing is creating an assessment, a risk assessment, a common language that can be used between organizations to understand what the cybersecurity posture is for any given organization across the breadth, depth, and size, and have that same conversation be valid no matter where you are in the world. So when we move on to the next slide, we've already touched on this slightly as well. You've got this ecosystem here, and why is it that Security Scorecard and Vodafone work well? Well, we know we're a piece of the pie, right? Okay, so what we're doing is we're providing that reconnaissance phase, the similar phase that an attacker would do to understand the risks or understand the vulnerabilities within that organization. But our aim, our ethos is to provide visibility, to provide a tool, a mechanism that will allow organizations to confidently talk to one another about their risks. These are some risks, these are some issues, these are some concerns that we've seen it rise up, but there also has to be an actionable status, a way in which we can take that very valuable, ever-changing, evolving data set and put in mechanisms and processes in place to ensure that they don't come back round to hurt us again. And we know that we want to provide that visibility, the need and the validation of why we need to do this. And Vodafone, a very key partner of ours that we work with very closely to help us implement those plans that will ultimately bring everybody's risk up or down, sorry, and everybody's risk score up. That's the key point there. So how does that come into the grand scheme of things? Is this another webinar to run scare tactics? Is this another one to come and say, hey, there's another breach and let's talk about it and everyone's at risk, but part with your money and then away we go? The idea really here, hopefully by the end of this presentation, is to understand that this is a common risk across everybody. The attackers are working together. Andre put this very, very clearly. They're working together. They're sophisticated. They are bold. They are brazen. They are actively, openly talking about this as if there's no consequences to their action. They've got carte blanche to everyone. And now they wouldn't be doing that if we, as a society, and certainly as a cybersecurity society, changed our mindset to say, well, actually, we should be working together. We should be talking together. We should be using a common language. We should be providing a mechanism that everybody can use to work and have a cohesive conversation about risk. So one of the things we need to do, or one of the reasons why we're here, is that when we put this into this quantification model here, and Security Scorecard uses letter grades, A, B, C, D, and F. So from the Western world, I think certainly from Europe and the US, we kind of know that grading system very well. But if not, we also use a percentage, 100% being perfect, and obviously lower percentages showing higher risks. When we look at that degradation and that change, those organizations that have a C, D, or F, which have on average higher than average number of issues or security findings, you're looking at an order of nearly 8 times more likely to have an incident. Now that's a huge multiplier. 8 times more likely to have an incident or breach when your risks are that high compared to your peers, compared to the group. So, the idea really here is to use a common language that anybody can understand, whether they're technical, non-technical, whether they're business-minded, whether they are not, to understand what is my security risk, what is the security risk of my partners that I work with, my supply chain, my direct business, my just-in-time business model that I have, and how do I understand that their security is at a level of mine, if I can get my words out, as it is for them as well. So this is part and parcel of what we're going to show you in the demonstration. An example, a subset of organizations using real world data to understand what these security risks are and how we can then take action above and beyond the traditional kind of point in time assessments that we do. So I'm gonna jump over now to the demonstration, and I have the ability to magically share my screen, hopefully. So I'm hoping that everybody can see my screen. I will take a nod from Andre, and away we go. Fantastic. So this is the Security Scorecard tool. This is, as I said, this is a platform that's used to assess every single IP address on the internet on a continuous basis, and then divide up the asset ownership over time as they evolve and change, of course, and attribute those to organizations so that we can get an understanding of comparative risk within an organization. Now, we do this today for approximately 8 to 8.2 million organizations. This is growing rapidly as we increase the number of companies that add to the platform. But we're using this data in order to provide these risk insights. Now, the example that we're going to use here is just a bunch of what I call key suppliers. But most organizations, I'm sure, will have some kind of concept of what they class as a key supplier, a tier 1 supplier, a critical risk supplier, tier 1, tier 2, whatever the naming convention is the same across the board. And if you have a set of key suppliers, really ask yourself the question, how easy is it at any given time during that contract period to say there is a good level of risk, there is a poor level of risk, there is a medium level of risk within my supply chain, there's an increased level of risk, there's a decreased level of risk. It is particularly hard to do. Now, again, as I said at the beginning, this isn't I'm bringing the doom and gloom across the board and everything is bleak and nothing's going to work very well, and then all of a sudden we have the crystal ball and perfect solution. It certainly isn't that, but it is a way of saying, let's have a conversation about how do I assess risk? How do I understand risk at any given time within the suppliers that I work with? Most of the suppliers that you work with will have an A or a B, or as we would say, 80% and above in their score, which is, as you saw from that graph that we showed previously, is a significant reduction in risk. It's a significant reduction in likelihood of risk. But as you go down the scale, there will always be some level of organization that we work with that potentially are exhibiting much higher levels of risk. So those with the C, D, or an F are going anywhere from 4 to 7 to 8 times more likely to have an incident. And now the point of SecurityScorecard is to quickly and easily highlight those vendors so that we can then start to take action within our supply chain, start to work with those vendors to understand those risks. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and I really love the analogy that Andre used, which was kind of the earthquake. There's the tremors, and there's the aftermath, of course, the devastating aftermath that we see in those events. And how does that actually really apply in the kind of real world? Well, there are a lot of precursor and post-cursory kind of events that we see. This is an arbitrary set of 97 companies. This will be different for everyone, and I'm certainly not going to pick on any individual company to be unfair against them, but simply put, there needs to be a quick and easy way to take a stock check. Where's my risk? What are the suppliers that I work with? How do I understand what some of those are? So now, if we look at things like the post-cursor side of things, how many companies did we work with that maybe have had a breach in the last year, or maybe have had an incident in the last year? In this case, we can quickly and easily see that 5 have had an incident. Now, you may not know that. You may not have been made aware that they've had an incident. Only in certain industries, of which I'm not sure retail is one of those, do you have to provide detailed information about the fact that you've had a breach. Certainly, there may not be any need to notify you if the data wasn't affected, but who knows in terms of that effect. So having a proactive way to identify within my supply chain which ones have had an incident, the after effect of an event, and of those organizations that I work with, which ones may impact my business. You know, as we said, if people are using a tool and they're logging in, or they're trying to buy something online with some transactions, security is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds now, and you know, ensuring and providing that confidence is very, very important. So being able to know within your suppliers and being able to understand very quickly and easily where some of those risks are is vitally important. Now, that's the kind of post-cursor side of things, but what about the precursor side of things, the early warning signs? Well, of course, the overall risk score is an early warning sign. If somebody maintains a very low score for a long period of time, it's very similar to healthcare, in that if I exercise and I eat the right things and I do everything, then I'm reducing my likelihood of risk. I can't eliminate it. Accidents happen all the time. But on the flip side of that, if I don't eat correctly, or I consume too much alcohol, or I don't look after my body, I'm significantly increasing over a period of time the likelihood of of significant illness. That's the nature of healthcare, and it's a very close analogy to what we see here. You can never say that if you have a poor score, you're definitely going to have an incident. You're just increasing that likelihood, and we want to get away from that increased likelihood of incident. So some of the precursor things that we can do, which are looking at some of the indicators that potentially would lead to incident, and we're going to use some examples here specifically around ransomware, as we touched on that at the beginning with the Cassia incident. Some of the incidents that we can look at in terms of organizations that have been spoken about on the dark web forum, ransomware events and incidents that have happened. Can we easily and understand any of our suppliers that might be just about to undergo something, or maybe some events have happened, those tremors, the early warning signs that we spoke about earlier? We might be able to see some of those that have had incidents. So if we take one example here, and by no means am I picking on Amy as they've done a bad job or anything like this. Sometimes people are just attacked and there's nothing we can do about it. One of the indicators that we can look at when we look at these sorts of things is what we call the alleged breach or incident, or even advertising that this organization has been breached on the dark web forum. Now, we've spoken about this again earlier in the call. The attackers are brazen, right? They think they have anonymity on the dark web. They say whatever they want to say, and if the company's been broken into, or they've taken, or there's been a ransomware event, they'll just say that there's been a ransomware event. These are all things that we can use to help protect ourselves, of course. So if we look at something like an alleged breach, and as we can see here as we go down, companies had an alleged breach with the Mount Locker ransomware, and this is the source that we see. And again, importantly, when did we see that observation? Well, the last observation that we saw of this was actually the 26th of December. So this is the tremor. This is the indicator that something may have happened within this organization. If we then go up to the actual confirmed breaches and incidents, so this is the organization itself notifying the world that they have had an event, and that they've had a ransomware event. You can see that just a few days after that last mention, on the precursor side of things, public disclosure was made by the organization that they'd had a ransomware attack, and of course, as we saw it, Mount Locker ransomware was the mention that we saw on the dark web forum. And now it's not always a one-to-one, and I'm certainly not painting a perfect story, but being able to look at some of those indicators, get some of those early warning signs into our systems, into our processes that allow us to even reduce some of these risks is vitally important. And that's just an example of the precursor matching up with the postcursor, where the events that happened previous unfortunately lead to an incident that may have happened. Now, in terms of SecurityScorecard and what we can do, we can provide this information. This is really important information. We can provide insights into companies. We can give you the ability to not only monitor yourself, but your suppliers, some other suppliers that may be at risk, some ones that aren't at risk today, but may be at risk in the future. We not only give you a risk as we see it today in terms of the score and incidences, but because we're a continuously monitoring solution, we can give you that change over time. So the score going from back in June, in this case, going all the way from a 72 up to where we see it today as an 81, is that evolution and journey of a vendor. And we can track and monitor those changes to understand when the risks become high and when they become low, and then take action on it. And that's the secondary most important thing here. Is information is fantastic, but actions are just as important. Being able to do something with that information to affect and provide a mechanism that ultimately reduces my overall risk, not increases it or merely tells me that it's all doom and gloom. So SecurityScorecard, from its very inception, came up with the concept, or maybe not came up with the concept, but bought into the concept that we are a community. No matter where we are, when we're defending ourselves, we are a community of organizations working to help protect ourselves against attackers. Now, as we've said earlier, they're working together, they're doing everything they can to attack us, and we should be working in the same vein. So SecurityScorecard, from its very beginning, came up, or has the concept that any organization anywhere in the world can claim their scorecard. That means if you're working with a supplier and some events or some risks are happening within that supplier, and you want that supplier to be able to reduce their score, or reduce their risk and increase their score, remove some indicators of compromise, that they may not know about. We talked about earlier, everything's changing, cloud assets, remote workers. It's very hard to track all these things. But let's say that you wanted to be able to do that. Security Scorecard gives you the ability to contact any company anywhere in the world, give them access to their scorecard, and start to take that proactive action. That means communication can happen between you and the vendor. It's a standard common conversation. It's a standard language. It's a standard risk conversation. And it's an offensive way of protecting ourselves against the attackers that we see today. So that's the we can take action. Now, why this is so important and why we work with Vodafone is we can only go so far. Security Scorecard can only get us to informational and actionable points, but there may be something that we can do by going further. We offer a singular service that allows us to dovetail and interact with other vendors. And one of those vendors, of course, being Vodafone, and what they can provide and their breadth and knowledge of global risks that we see and the services that we can then use, and I'm sure Andre will touch on this in a little bit, are vitally important in being proactive and taking that step to protect ourselves. We are the kind of first step, the reconnaissance phase, to highlighting that there is a risk and taking those actions within the suppliers, but there is obviously a journey that happens after that as well. So this is just one example of some risks that we have. Again, continuous monitoring is a great way of understanding or assessing risk within the supply chain. It's a method or a way in which we can help scale. So it's saying we're not just looking at 4 or 5 vendors, we're looking at everybody that we work with, the interconnected mesh network of every vendor that we work with, and having a mechanism for each of those vendors to protect themselves, a mechanism for us to be alerted and warned, notified that something's happening within the risks that we or within the vendors that we work with, to even get ahead of it, try and prevent that breach from happening. If there's some indicators that I can be notified about, then in turn notify that vendor about, that they can then take action before the breach happens. That is the ideal world that we all want to get to, and that is a fundamental part of what Security Scorecard is doing every single day as they monitor and nurture the evolution of risks on the internet, on the exposures of each of those companies, and by extension each of those suppliers as well. So that's pretty much my my presentation and the demo, and I wanted to, of course, give you some insights there without necessarily picking on any single company, but give you an example. I'm sure towards the end of this we'll discuss a little bit more about how we can then help each of these organizations, or each of your organizations, in starting that journey in supply chain risk and understanding. Thank you.
How many times a day do you not click on mute? Thank you, Adam. Just fascinating and lovely to see a live demo handled with such aplomb. We are undoubtedly digitally reliant. I do not believe we are yet digitally resilient. The only way that your business can become resilient is by starting with an accurate and up-to-date view of your risk. And there is no better lens to view than that of an attacker. People's brand and reputation is directly linked to their security posture and security risk. And I think it's that single truth which drives the conversation that we've just been having. And it is not a point in time. And what you see in front of you here, I guess, is a big set of security services and products that we can and do provide globally. But it's important, I think, to start and understand assessment is the first step, then protecting your environment, being able to detect an attack externally or internally and respond in real time gives you that change in your security maturity and posture. And if there's something that stood out for me, Adam, it's that a more resilient organization is a safer one, and you are 8 times safer, 8 times less likely to be breached than if you are not. The difference between scoring A and D on your scale. And I think that drives and should help us all identify the risk, quantify that, and build on that over time. And that's really where we see there's so much value in this. You can only do that at scale. You can only understand your external risk by looking at the world, the global threat picture. Right? Our promise and our value proposition as Vodafone and SecurityScorecard is that we make that easy to understand for you and also easy to consume. And you see here a whole host of very simple consumable security services that will help you improve your score. And it just cannot and should never be a single point in time moment. The adversaries are relentless and dynamic in targeting your organizations, your customers, and your data. We are as relentless and dynamic in building up that global picture and responding to those threats and helping you build your resilience from the inside out. And I think you only do that by taking the view that we can provide you together. And I think that's probably a good place for us to pause. And I think the only bit that it possibly remains for me to say is that we're not just painting that big picture of the scary world, helping people understand risk and understand the importance of security and privacy and how it impacts their business, but that we can help both in building that risk view and turning your organization to be much more resilient. And we'd love to extend an offer to you, which is, if you just want to start, right? How do you start? Well, give us a ring. If people still use mobile phones, which I really hope you do, but you can also email us, any number of different ways to contact it. But call your account manager or call us, or put your name in the chat from this webinar. We will give you a scorecard view of your organization and the organizations you work with and help you understand that picture and where you are excelling and have adopted the appropriate risk controls and maybe areas where you could be improved. And remember that if you can see this, then the attackers can, and quite possibly the people you work with and your suppliers or competitors can. And I think that transparency is super helpful for us all. And as Adam said, right, collective defense is a really important concept, and we genuinely will work together to help you build and change your security program and risk posture and become more resilient. And yeah, it starts with a call, I guess, and it can start with understanding and know that this isn't a point in time tick-based Excel spreadsheet. You know, hundreds of millions of data points every single day between Vodafone and SecurityScorecard can give you this view. So I think on that note, we may pause, have a sip of water, and take any questions that come in, maybe. So, Aidan, are you going to be question monitor?
I've always wanted to be monitor.
We have a question in the chat to the panel. Can you explain, please, how SecurityScorecard monitors a company's external view from a hacker's point of view? How do you do it, and how accurate are your cyber scores?
Yeah, really good question. I probably should take that one, given I'm the engineer at SecurityScorecard. So, SecurityScorecard is essentially, they have an interconnected, interwoven mesh network of sensors on the internet, and what these sensors are doing is on a continuous basis probing and gathering information about the public internet. So what does this asset do? Who does it belong to? What record says it belongs to this company? What indicator gives us an idea that it belongs to this company? We collect through that infrastructure between 45, I think, and 48 billion signals, that's cybersecurity signals, a week. So within 1 week. So this massive network is processing and collecting huge amounts of data on an ongoing basis about the public internet. So think about it in terms of flipping the tide somewhat, because an attacker will have a target. They'll just go, right, I'm after this piece. It's the needle in the haystack. They're going after that one area, and so they can go and do their reconnaissance and find these things. What we're saying is we don't know what an attack is going to do, but we have to be able to provide a kind of a blanket coverage of understanding of cyber risks. So this mesh network is collecting everything it can possibly get its hands on about anything that's publicly available on the internet, asset ownership, what the asset does, is it cloud, is it on-premise, are there any security findings? So is it an IoT device? Is that IoT device directly connected to the internet? Is it, you know, are we seeing things like malware communications or ransomware communications, that sort of thing? And all of that is collected and brought together and recalculated and generated on a daily basis to generate an overall score. Now, the second part of that is the accuracy. One of the things that we would all strive to be and love to be is 100% accurate. It's an impossibility, I believe. We all strive to get there, but 100% accuracy has to mean that 1,001 things in a given day have to go perfectly right for that to happen. But at the same time, the only way in order to strive or make to that or get to that level of accuracy is to be 100% transparent. So every single score, every single risk, every single asset, every single finding, everything that we collect is made 100% transparent to the user of SecurityScorecard. And this is to show and build confidence that when we generate a score, what is in scope, what is there, what is valuable in terms of the risks and the security signals that we find is accurate. And there is no place to hide. We cannot hide behind smoothing or covering or any of those sorts of things. All the information that we put is made 100% available so that we can build a trust in that our score is accurate and that our risk findings are 100% in the right direction, which is trying to provide a risk portfolio or risk score that is in everybody's favor to understand.
Thank you, Adam. We've got one further question. Please, could you talk a little bit around the value that Vodafone brings from a security perspective to its customers?
So the best questions till last. I think, and genuinely, that's a fascinating view, because if I think and look at how the security industry has been evolving, as the attackers have as well. Security has been, I think, for many years, complex, expensive, and really quite fragmented. And everything we have done in technology adoption, in our security investments, has not helped address those fundamentals that security is complex to deliver. It's ever evolving, the attackers change. It's expensive to do security. There's always something else you can buy, you can implement, and it's really fragmented. Our singular goal in this space is to curate and consolidate those security solutions and controls across that very simple approach, assessing your posture, putting the key protections in place, being able to detect and respond in real time. So to curate that and integrate those services so they are simple to understand and easy to consume. And then tailor those to your specific organization. And I think Scorecard gives us exactly that. Right? Who else can see the world at the scale and understand the threat? And we've been able to turn that into very clear, very actionable package service that gives you insight now and every day and every minute going forward. And I think it's a great example of exactly what we're doing at Vodafone. It is that business resilience seen through your organization's lens. And we take all of that complexity, all of the expense and the fragmented nature of the security world and create simple security for you. That's the value proposition. And we'll do that in markets all around the world for hundreds of millions of customers, but also actually focused on individual organizations. And we don't believe that security should just be for the large complex businesses. Security is a fundamental right that everybody has, and that's how we're building our services. And I think this is a great example of that. So hopefully that answers the question about the value. It's really hard and complex to do this stuff at scale. You can only protect and understand the cybersecurity market at global scale, but you should never lose sight of the fact that organizations need help and need to be able to consume and understand these things, and that's the role we play. And I think bringing together partners like SecurityScorecard give us that opportunity.
We have one further question. How do I trial the service?
I think, as we said, the best possible way is just reach out to your Vodafone account team. If not, reach out to us. I think there's probably an email we can share later on. If you've signed up, we'll send you some further information if you're watching this webinar live or as a recording. So again, we'll help you make that happen, and you can trial the service and start that journey. So that's the best way. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, panel. We have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Andre. And on behalf of both Vodafone Business and Security Scorecard, I'd like to thank everybody for joining today, and look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.